What's up, guys? Brian Grossman here with Grossman Woodworking and DIY. And on today's video, we're going to be building this cool flag display case for a casket flag. And in this case, it's my dad's casket flag who passed away back in June of 2024. And I'm going to walk you through the entire process step by step, including how to cut these funky 67.5-degree angles on the corners. I'll simplify that for you. And every other step along the way. It's not a difficult build. And if you got a flag that you need to display, man, this is a really cool way to do it. Now, I do want to give a shout out to my buddy Josh, because when my dad first passed away, he bought me a flag case off of Amazon and had it. It was at my door waiting when I got home from the funeral from Kentucky. And so my dad's flag has been in that the whole time. But I knew when I started doing a little woodworking that this was something I wanted to build at some point, and it just it got that time. So that's what we did. Couple things worth noting here. First of all, you can use any 3/4 inch wood to build this. I have, as I've mentioned before on some of my videos, piles and piles of this old pine tongue and groove flooring. So that's what I used because I wanted to do mainly a trial run. I didn't want to mess up, 50, 60, 70 bucks worth of walnut. So I use these, and I like the way it turned out, but you can use any kind of 3/4 inch wood you want to use. Another thing worth noting is I did build a jig to be able to do this, and you'll see me use it in the video, but I really didn't get into the jig itself. And as you can see, it's pretty simple. It's just two 1x, or really 3/4 inch boards. You could use 2x if you wanted to, but you just need to make a 90-degree angle on a piece of plywood. And this is going to clamp up against the fence of your miter saw. So your blade will be lined up with one edge, and you can put the 1x board up against that edge and set your saw at an angle and cut steeper angles on that board. It'll allow you to cut those 67.5-inch angles that you need to cut. So really simple little jig. You should be able to throw this together in 5 minutes or so, and you'll be able to cut those bottom angles without any issues. And then one last thing I need to mention if you're going to build this, because I forget to give you any dimensions during the course of the build. So just so you know, these two pieces are 18 inches long from corner to corner. That's the longest point, 18 inches. The bottom board is 25 and I think 3/8 from end to end total length. So I wanted you to know that part of it. Of course, you can always, if you already have a flag on hand, measure your flag and make your own dimensions to get it the exact fit you need, but that should get you at least started. 18 by 25 and 3/8. So with that, I think that's everything you need to know. Let's go ahead and dive into the build.
The first step was ripping the boards to their 3.5-inch width. And since these old floorboards were tongue and groove and a little rough on the edges, I had to take some off of each side of the board to get two nice straight edges. Then it was over to my fine bi-tool planer to run them through just enough times to get a good clean surface on both sides. Next, it was over to the miter saw to cut the angles on each of the boards. And this is the toughest part of building a standard flag display case, because it requires cutting both ends of that bottom board and one end on each of the two top boards at a 67.5-degree angle, which most miter saws aren't designed to cut. Most of them max out at either 45 or 50-degree angles. So I had to create this makeshift jig that holds the boards at 90 degrees to the miter saw fence, and then I can set the miter saw to 22.5 degrees, and that gets me my 67.5-degree cut. Once I had those cuts made, I just did a test fit of the pieces to figure out where I needed to make my 45-degree cuts at the top of the triangle. Now, I could have done some math to figure this out, the whole Pythagorean's theorem, I believe it is. But I thought it would be easier to just mark where the pieces cross and make my cut that way. And after I made those cuts, it actually went together surprisingly well. Then it was over to the table saw to cut the groove for the glass front to slide into, as well as the rabbet groove on the back of the display case for the back. And I set my fence at 1/4 inch for the glass groove and ran each piece through one time, and that was plenty wide enough to fit that glass in. For the rabbet, I left the fence at 1/4 inch and set my blade to 1/4 inch high, ran each board through once flat to make the initial groove, and then I turned them up and ran them through vertically to finish cutting out that corner of the board for a nice 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch rabbet. Then it was time to cut the glass for the display case, and I had a bunch of old windows that were on the property when I bought it, and I thought, hey, this would be a great use for them. I went and bought me just a cheap glass cutter. Thought this shouldn't be too difficult to cut out a nice triangle, and boy, was I wrong. Maybe it was just me and not knowing what I was doing, but I could not get those angles on each corner of the triangle. I could not get them to keep from breaking every time I tried to cut that glass. And so then it was back to the drawing board and back to Home Depot for some plexiglass. Once I got back with the plexiglass, or actually Lexan, I marked my cut and used a cheap cutting scoring tool that I picked up from Home Depot and scored it along my 4-foot level. Now, in retrospect, I could have just used a good utility knife that I already had on hand, but the cutter that I bought worked just fine. And after scoring it multiple times, the Lexan snapped right along the line just how I needed it to. Now, I should have left the protective sheeting on the outside part of the Lexan to protect it from my finish, but I didn't. So definitely a lesson learned there for future reference. But with the Lexan cut, it was time to dry fit it into my case to make sure it fit just like I needed it to. And after getting all the boards lined up properly, it did. Now, on to my favorite part, sanding. And yeah, that was sarcasm. So I start that process by putting on my base camp mask, which I really like over the old cartridge style one that I used to wear. It's much easier to take on and off and much more comfortable. And I'll throw a link to them in the video description if you're interested in checking those out. But anyway, I give the boards a good sanding with my orbital sander and some 120 grit sandpaper on all sides. And then I switch over to hand sanding with some 220 just for the kind of the finishing touches. And with the sanding complete, it's time to move on to the staining process. Now I went with a Varathane walnut colored stain and started on the inside of the flag case, applying the stain generously. And I make one of several mistakes here, which you can already start to see, and that is I don't get a good coat down in the groove where the glass goes, or the Lexan. Not that I want to fill that crack up with stain, but you do want to get enough down there to just coat that bare wood, and unfortunately I do not. Now I don't want the boards too dark, as I still want the grain to show through, so after waiting a few minutes, I go ahead and wipe off the excess stain, and I'm pretty happy overall with just the darkness and the look of the grain. Then I move on to staining the outside of the case, which was my next mistake. In hindsight, I wish I would have saved the outside staining until the very end, because I would still need to use wood filler later in the process to fill some brad nail holes and some joints, which of course then required sanding off some of the stain with the wood filler and having to apply another coat of stain. So another lesson learned there for sure. But I ultimately did 3 coats of stain, and it was finally ready for the assembly process. So I started assembly by first joining the two top pieces of my triangle together at their 45-degree angles, using some Titebond 3 wood glue and a few brad nails. Now, if I were building this with any type of wood other than this reclaimed pine, I wouldn't have shot those brad nails in there. I would have just found a good way to clamp the boards at that 90-degree angle and let the glue do its job. But since this is old reclaimed pine, I figured a few nail holes wouldn't hurt anything, and I could easily cover them up with some wood filler. Next, I fitted in my piece of Lexan, as it needed to be in place before I could add that bottom board. Then I added glue to my 67.5-degree angled cuts, got the bottom board in place and lined up, ensuring the Lexan was in the groove that I'd cut all the way around, and shot a few brad nails on each side from the bottom where I wouldn't have to worry about them showing. With the case assembled, now it was time to fill in my nail holes and chips and joints with some wood filler. And as I mentioned earlier, I should not have stained the outside before this part of the process. I should have put the wood filler on first, then sanded, then done my final staining. It would have been less work, and I feel certain that my wood filler wouldn't have been as visible as it ends up being. But in woodworking, you live and you learn. That's one of the reasons why I built this first one with these old pine floorboards that I already had on hand, rather than starting with a nice piece of walnut and running that. So, yep, just live and learn. Once the wood filler dried, I hit it all with some sandpaper to just smooth out that wood filler, and then wiped it down and added a final coat of stain. Then it was time for the finish. I opted to use the Danish oil that I had on hand from when I made the wooden box out of poplar. I like how it turned out and just thought it would be good for this project as well. Just like I did before, I put on a couple of coats, spreading it on heavy, then waiting 15 to 20 minutes and wiping off the excess. And then, of course, I'd give that time to dry before I added another coat. After the final wipe down, it was time to put the finishing touches on this project. I cut the back out of some 1/4-inch hardboard that I'd picked up at Home Depot. Then I added some of the little picture frame type pivoting hold downs that I bought off of Amazon to hold the back in place. And with those installed, I added my dad's casket flag, put on the back, folded in the little clips, and called this one done.
All right, guys, so that wraps up our build of the flag display case. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this thing turned out. It is certainly, again, as I always say, it's not perfect. Mistakes were made. I shared some of those with you through the course of the build, including staining these pieces on the outside before I filled in my nail holes and stuff. That's been probably my biggest regret, because you can see where I used wood filler on some of these places. Not so much the nail holes, but there were some splits right here, or some flakes that I had to fill in. So it's certainly not perfect. I can see a little bit down into the groove of the glass where I didn't get stained down in there. But otherwise, I mean, again, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I intentionally used these old pine tongue and groove floorboards to build it, because I didn't want to waste, good quality wood. So now that I've gone through this, I'm planning on doing here down the line, maybe not right away, but I'm going to do another build. I'm going to use some good hardwood, probably walnut, and maybe put like some hard maple splines in the corners just to dress it up. And maybe even do something a little fancier with the base plate of it. But that's on down the line. This one's done. Like I said, overall, I'm pretty happy with it. If you enjoyed this video and feel like you got anything out of it all, please take a second just to hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell. It helps me grow this channel as I shoot for 10,000 subscribers and beyond. So that'll help me big time if you'll do that. Share the video, whatever you can do. I appreciate all the support. And all of you who are watching and liking and sharing my videos, can't thank you enough. But guys, with that, I guess as always, I'll see you on the next video.